Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Mobbs from X-Rite Photo Europe, and I'd like to welcome you to our latest webinar, Portraiture and Weddings in Natural Light with X-Rite Coloratti Kevin Wilson. We'll be taking questions halfway through the webinar and also at the end, but unfortunately due to time we can't answer all questions. Please use the questions box provided and we'll take a selection of questions for Kevin. Before Kevin gets underway, let me give you a quick introduction. So a bit about Kevin. Kevin Wilson is widely acclaimed as one of Europe's leading wedding portrait photographers. He has a rare distinction of fellowship in all three major photographic bodies: the Master Photographers Association, the British Institute of Professional Photography, and the Royal Photographic Society. For more information, see Kevin's website at www.kevinwilson.co.uk. In this webinar, Kevin will cover the following topics: reflectors, lighting, posing, creating space, and refinement of image. So I would now change presenter to Kevin, and he will start the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Nice introduction. So thank you for all those that have taken the time to listen to what I have to say and to take some time to view my work and how I work. And I will go through various methods of lighting and posing, weddings and portraits. And as Dave's already pointed out, if you want any questions, just note them down. No questions stupid. If it's important to you, then we'll have a go at answering it. Well, I've been using Capture One since I first started in digital photography, and the reason I use it is because I believe it's the very best color conversion that you can get. And there are certain steps that I take to ensure that anything that I do, it makes things easy for me, because I was brought up on film, and so therefore I try and get everything right in the camera. But what is very useful is all the tools that we've got in Capture One, which are far too numerous to go into in depth. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the things that I use. So color management is always the thing that has been a mystery to everybody, and certainly to me it always proved to be that. But X-Rite and Capture One for me make things so simple, providing you get everything right on your screen to start off with. So everything starts out with the trusted friend, the Pro 2. And I just recently bought a new ISO screen, and that one is self-calibrator, but I still like to use my iPro because it is so spot on. And I do it once a month and make sure that everything's coming out the same as I see it on my computer as what comes out on the print, because obviously you don't want to be spending time at a computer if at the end of the day your pictures aren't coming out the way they should be. But you can also use this thing for paper profiling and for your projector, and it's 100% accurate. The other thing that I find very useful is to use color checker cards. Now these come in different sizes, and this is the pocket one, which is quite handy if you want to keep it in your pocket nearby. And it's a great reference, because when you're actually taking colors in your mind, and then you come back to the computer and you look at it and you think to yourself, well, just how pink was that dress, or how blue was it? Having a color checker is always a great reference. Now this one's very useful to put in your pocket. However, my personal one is the A4, and that just slips into my bag, and I keep it in out of the way, make sure it doesn't get damaged. And it's very simple then to get your exposure right within your camera, and then place it in front of the object you want to photograph, and then, for example, flowers. So basically get your exposure right. Once you've got your exposure right, bring your color checker in, and then when you come back into your editing software, just click onto the grey balance or the white balance, and then you'll find it makes it so much easier to give you the reference to what you're looking at. and that is the resulting. So you can see there's quite a difference, and that is true accurate colour. So if you go from there to here, I find that to be a very valuable tool, because it is impossible to remember the hues and the slight tones that are within images, dresses, etc. Here's another example here with the blue wall, which is in tungsten light. And it's in a corridor. You're never ever going to remember how blue that is. But then when you bring your model in and you've got your exposure correct, it's quite a simple case of just balancing it and getting your exposure correct. Another scenario here was a portrait I was doing against a yellow wall. But again, trying to remember just how yellow that wall is. And another thing that is very confusing is brides, they tend to have spray tones. And then it's very, very difficult to try and analyse what the colour should be. So from this setting here to here, that's exactly, so you can see the blues and the colours of the dress and the flowers exactly as they are. But I try to get everything as near as possible when I'm shooting it. So make sure your exposure's right and your composition's good. Now we've got these two photographs here, and it's just available light coming in from the window with a reflector back at camera position, throwing light up onto the back of the girl's dress. But the thing about this is getting a nice key light into the face. The reflectors I use are quite large, and invariably you'll find me with a silver, which is 6 foot by 4 foot, a total black, which is 6 foot by 4 foot, and a diffuser, which is the same size. And all three of those will be used in some stage of the wedding that I'm doing, or the portrait. The black for total blocking, and a diffuser for diffusing, as you would expect, but mainly using it in different parts of the photograph, which is important to me. The silver adds a beautiful specular light, and that is something which is probably the most useful. I wouldn't recommend buying a gold one, for example, or any of these that fold up and you get 4, 5 or 6 different panels to go over the reflector. Just keep to the silver, the black and the white diffuser. Makes them very easy. Now you may ask, why would you use a black one? Well, if you can imagine this photograph that's in front of you now, that's taken in bright sunshine. It is so bright there, the contrast levels are really high, and what we've done is we placed a 6 foot by 4 foot black gobo above her head, and then a silver reflector from underneath to reflect some light back up into her face. And then the pose is very strong, using the lines and the shape of the girl's body. And when you go to the bride's home, I like to take portraits like this. Rather than doing the makeup, which everybody else does, I try to find areas that have got an interest. And this was in a hotel on the south coast. And behind the girl there was a bright open window. So we drew the curtains, and then it was a bay window, so we closed the window, the curtains in the bay window, to make it very narrow. So the light was coming in from the right hand side to light the back of her hair, and then from the left hand side the light was coming in to give a beautiful key light to her face. And when you're planning an album, sometimes you may need to have an upright, and then you may decide you want to use a view. So I'll tend to go in very close with an 85mm lens, concentrating on the eyes, shooting at a fairly wide aperture, so the eyes are just in focus, and that's all there is. This is taken on a full frame. A lot of my work is, as you've seen, it's very little cropping involved. This is a full frame on a 50mm lens, and the emphasis on this is the lace work. And when I'm taking my pictures, I quite often will cut off the top of the head, but just keep the top line of the eye in to give you a more interesting feel. It gives a fashion feel to the work that you're doing. But the lace was the thing that really I wanted to portray here. And so we had window light coming from the left-hand side with a diffuser and a reflector on the right-hand side, just to throw a little bit of relief up onto her left-hand side of the body. Another example of using very shallow depth of field. This is on an 85mm lens, taken at 1.2, so the only place that's in focus is her eye. And again, so we've got the light coming in from the window, and then they're just looking along the edge of the curtains towards my face. And it focuses exactly where you want it to be. Another preparation portrait. It is a portrait because it's a portrait of the shoes. But I always try and find something a little bit interesting, something which adds strength to the portrait. And in this case, this beautiful window in the room where the bride was getting ready, I thought suited it really beautifully. Again, in this one, it's the light coming through from the window with a silver reflector underneath, throwing the light up underneath to the heels and the body of the shoe. They spend a fortune on their shoes, so look for a setting that complements it. And a slightly different take, a very shallow depth of field. This is taken on a grand piano, wide open aperture, 1.2. Love the reflections on it and the shape of the hills. This portrait was taken on a real live wedding. It's been a very successful one for me. It's won me lots of competitions over the years, and it's very, very popular with the brides. The actual couple were going through a rehearsal in between the main course and their suite, their dessert. And so I decided to try and capture them and orchestrate this particular portrait. I explained to the groom that I wanted him to be like a matador. And I also wanted him to echo the tree coming in from the right-hand side with his arms, and then his hand behind his back, as you would see with a bullfighter. And then I got the bride to just kick her heel up so we can see their stiletto and the champagne glass on the floor. But this took about 4 or 5 takes to get it. But it was just one of those pictures that I've tried to repeat again, but I've never had the same success in creating that. A lot of it relies on the strength of the background as well, which is about 150 years old. It's on a stage, which was used many, many years ago, put on productions for the local villagers. And now, wedding photography has changed so much over the recent years. And what's really made that possible is digital. In the days of when we were shooting on film, 400 ISO was a luxury. Now we can use 10,000 ISO and get a good result, providing the exposure is correct. Creating something memorable is always my goal on the wedding day, without ruining the day by stealing all their time. And there's something that will be recognised as a Kevin Wilson portrait. And while I'm taking this, I've got an end result in mind, and I'm just explaining to the bride exactly what I wanted to do. I've told her I would like her to dance with the veil, and not too long before they get into the role and they start to really enjoy what's going on. This is taken in open shade underneath a veranda, no need for any reflectors at all. It was just really beautiful light, nice and soft. Very slow shutter speed, around about a 15th of a second, to create a little bit of an ethereal feel to it. And now we've just got her moving her hips about and using the veil and dancing around. No music, but just because she's completely lost, oblivious to the fact that I'm there now. And it really does give a beautiful feel to the portrait. I told her to think about the 7 veils. And then, I went through a whole series on this particular session. They were very, very successful. And then I tried to do something even more dramatic, as in the next portrait. So now I've changed the focal length of the lens, and I've dropped the shutter speed down to around about 1/8 of a second. I've leaned against a pillar, and I've taken this. I just asked the bride to throw her head back. It didn't fall off, but it does create a really nice feeling, and it just speaks wedding. And when I'm doing the preparations, I'm always looking for areas that will be slightly different and how we can show a certain type of a shoe, or how we can use a veil in some way. As in this instance here, this was in a very grand, beautiful building, and we've got the veil hanging off a chandelier and gone down the floor, and then my assistant has dropped the veil from the chandelier, not dropped it completely, it's still on the hanger, but it was a very long one, and you've got that nice feeling. So it's giving them something which is different than what they would normally expect to get. Shooting through doorways is something that always adds interest, and these rooms here were very blue. And one of the things what I like about Capture One in particular is the way that you can manipulate the colour on it so easily and so simple. In fact, I'm using Capture 8.2 now, and that is so beautiful. There's a new colour editing tool in there which is so easy for using getting your mixed light right. So basically this is again just window light coming in from the right hand side and into the other bedroom, shooting through the doorway, and that will make a nice portrait on the page for the bridal album. And so obviously we're going to photograph the dress in different ways, from the front, from the back. I'm just giving you a couple of examples here. I'd probably go in close as well and then shoot diagonally across the dress, so that the light skips across and you get more detail. And then we have the bridesmaid's dress. Again, if you've got 3 pictures now going across the page, it will make a nice double spread. And then back to the shoes again, very glitzy. And so I found this nice chair back, which was looking good with the red against the silver, which worked really well and makes quite a striking detail portrait. This is the same location with the girl's shoes, and now she's got her dress on, and that's a picture of Shakespeare behind her. Very simple, getting the feet right, getting the pose, getting the light, and of course creating the space around the portrait. Very, very few photographers that I see allow space, but if you do allow space around the portrait, it will allow you to crop it how you want it to be. But I pretty much compose in camera, and so I will have done this as a full length as well, but then I'll just come in a bit closer. But I have seen other photographers been in this same location and they cut right through Shakespeare's head and it doesn't work. And not always do these type of portraits work out as well as this one, because this is a second attempt at this particular venue. The time I went before, I was aware about that rail, the dahlia rail behind her, but her hands were slipping out the bottom of the portrait. So when I went back this time, I was well prepared for it. Again, the same couple, and in the derelict part of the building, just shooting through the doorway, but now showing the back of the bride's dress. The light's coming in from the right-hand side, and then there's a silver reflector to the left-hand side to throw some relief back up into the groom's waistcoat and put a nice cat's light into the eyes. Control of light, along with the colour management, is an area that many do not bother to pay attention to. Window lighting can produce a light source, but it needs very, very careful consideration. And so my preference is to shoot loosely, and I'm going to decide upon what's going to be my canvas. So I've got an example now of how I would use a diffuser. So I've composed the portrait, I've posed it, and I will decide on where I want the crop to be. I've got my diffuser into the window, which is cutting down the light coming onto a dress, because otherwise we're going to have blown out highlights and we won't be able to control them. So I'm looking at this now, and the only thing I needed to be aware of was where her dress needed to be, where the areas the dress could go to without being lost within the portrait and doing a lot of retouching. So it's a very simple portrait, just the light from the window, the diffuser to control the highlights, and down in the bottom right hand side you'll see my silver 6 foot by 4 foot reflector, which is throwing light back up onto the left hand side of her body. And now I'll show you the only bit of retouching on this when I finish is to take out the wall socket. And there's a resulting portrait. So it's very simple, you don't need to go to great lengths. It relies heavily on body shape, expression of the eyes, bringing the eyes back to the camera, good use of hands. And again, another corridor. You know, I often walk around the hotel beforehand, and this is an area that would probably, most people would just walk past it. It was very mundane, it was down a back alley into the end of the hotel, but the lighting conditions were absolutely beautiful. So she's just gone past the window, she's not directly in line with it, but she's giving that beautiful short light to her face. And it's just something that needs no control over, apart from the pose and the expression. But the idea is to take her past the window. As you can see, she's right up to the very edge of it, so the light is now travelling across her. This one is the doorways to the church, and so we've just closed the 2 doors, brought them in nice and close, and concentrated on the facial area, and used a silver reflector to throw some light back up into her face. Time to change the lens, and we've gone in really close now. That's full frame, that portrait, and the light is just coming straight into her face. And again, very, very shallow depth of field, probably around about 2.8. And one of the things that I'll do on a wedding is I'll have 2 camera bodies, one with a 24 to 70 and a 70 to 200. And then you can get the most versatile pictures that you need to do without having to go too far. For example, this one here, with the veil across her face, is taken as a close-up from this one here. So they're in exactly the same location, but she just pulled the veil across with a 70 to 200, whereas that's at the 70 end. So by using the zoom, we're able to create 2 completely different portraits. Now we're onto a woodland setting, and this is around about 8 o'clock in the evening. The bride was about ready to go in for her evening meal and wedding breakfast, and I just called her. She was walking in, and she turned and looked back. But again, nice warm tones to it, good detail in the dress and the expression, nice pose. Now this is at the opposite end, the 200mm, and taken with a very low angle, shooting through the grass, and it adds a beautiful softness to the composition. Again, full frame, and this would have been one of a sequence of photographs that was taken on the day. Normally, I would say that there's too much white on the near side of the camera for me to accept that, but because her expression is so engaging, I think it works really well. Same wedding, a little bit later in the day. We were just going home, and I could just see the moon there, and outside was a floodlight in the car park. And so I thought, well, I could see the mist coming up from it, where it was very cold. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if I can get an image here. And I put it up to 10,000 ISO, and I was very pleased with the result that I got. It's never going to win any competitions, but it's quite an effective portrait. And this is more without the moon in it as well. So it came in with a closer crop. So control, and I think really because I've been brought up on film, all I ever had to do was get my exposure correct, and the printer did the rest. And keeping it simple now, I've used C1 since the beginning, which gives me the best colour conversion, as I said before. But getting my exposure is key to getting successful results. I tend to work via my histogram, and what determines my apertures and my speed are the shutter, because I don't like working on a tripod unless I really have to, because it's just another barrier. However, when I'm on my shutter speed, what I'm trying to think about is what's the lowest speed that I can go down to. I mentioned earlier on going down to an 1/8 of a second or a 15th, but that's okay if you've got something to lean against. But when you've got nothing to lean against, it's a lot more difficult. So I always determine that I want the highest possible shutter speed that I can get.
Hi, Kevin. Are you okay to take a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
So we have a question from Milan. They've said, can you...
Milan?
Yeah, Milan. The question is, can you please describe illumination of your working place during photo editing, and also how that differs from creating camera profiles using Color Checker?
Right. I'll try and answer that the best way I possibly can. Is my lighting conditions, I've got a grey wall behind where I'm working, so it's fairly neutral, and I've got two screens, one either side, and one is an iMac and the other one is the ISO, and the iMac is the new 5K one, which makes it a little bit difficult to it looks great on the iMac, but you have to get used to making sure that you do your editing on the ISO. And my screens are calibrated, they're spot on. So when my prints come back, they're pretty much within 1 or 2% of what I would expect it to be, and it's generally just a contrast. And then the other thing that I try and make sure is when I'm working, I don't use any bright colours on my clothes, because it can throw light back onto the screen and give you a false representation of what it is. So I try to keep fairly neutral in what I'm wearing. And with reference to the colour checker, as long as you've got your exposure right, I just generally go to the grayscale or the white. I just try 2 or 3 different patches until it brings back the most pleasing result. And it always seems to work out spot on to me.
Okay, great. Are you okay to take another question?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one's from Timu. He said, earlier you mentioned the Color Checker palette. How do you combine it with Capture One? Is it possible?
Okay, so when I'm in Capture One, in fact, I very, very rarely use Photoshop at all. Everything I do is in Capture One. You don't need to go out of it. Provided you've got everything right, you don't need to do anything massive. You can do everything in Capture One. And some of the things I'm going to be talking about a bit later on are the new conversions for black and white, which are actually sensational.
Okay, great. So we'll do a bit more Q&A at the end, if that's okay, Kevin.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so if you carry on, then that's great.
Yeah, so what was this question again? We'll finish it off. Oh yeah, so what I do is I only shoot raw files, and so when I come into Capture One, I click onto the color checker, and then I get the light balance, and then I'll select the next 4 or 5 frames that have been taken in the same lighting conditions, and then I just synchronize them all and they come out the same. The only time it's going to change is if the light source changes, or if you go outside. So I probably would take, for example, making sure my lighting is really controlled within the environment I'm working in. I just take the one exposure, make sure it's right. Once I've got it right, I then do the next sequence of photographs. And then I move on to the next. Once I move my location, again, I take another reading. Does that answer it?
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that.
Okay. This portrait here was a groom on a wedding last year. It was taken in Devon, and it was probably one of the worst days you could ever possibly have. we had to go up to this is a place called Bovey Castle. We had to go right up onto the top floor to get some light which was travelling across to give me that beautiful key light on him. This is a conversion in black and white, straight from the raw file, and I've just gone into the styles, and I've gone on to the portrait high contrast, and look at the beautiful result. Very simple. I think you'd have a job to try and get pictures like this in Photoshop without doing an awful lot of work. And this is again just trying to produce something a little bit different. And for those of you who remember a program called Harry Worth, he used to do this mirror image, so he'd hide behind it and then get the double side of the face. It looks quite haunting, doesn't it? A lot of my weddings cover the full day. And quite often the choice to photograph the groom will be later in the day, especially as the sun's going down, because I hate using the midday light, and I know sometimes you're very restricted, but where it's possible, if you're going to be there later on in the day, I would take the groom into a location which would treat it more as a very bespoke portrait. And the lighting here is, as you can see, it is coming from the side, both sides and the back, and I have a silver reflector in the foreground just to put a little cat's light into his eyes and lift the texture of his skin. This was a wedding I did in Ireland last year, and the guy in the picture is a groom. He's a photographer himself, as is his bride, and they invited me over to do their photographs last year. We found this location, which is some old boarded up houses, and a graffiti artist has come along, a very highly talented artist, and painted these murals on the wall. So we use it to our advantage to make some quite striking portraits. This is, again, another example of window light. Just light coming through the window, reflected to the left-hand side, which is silver. Nice, interesting background behind him. And this is the same location as the bridegroom, but two steps down. So really interesting and very clever use of this artist for me to be able to use this. It looks like she just stepped outside from the room. Location portraits is, again, another area where you can earn quite a bit of money. Living close to the seaside is always a fine opportunity. So whenever we visit the beach, it's nearly always bright sunshine or loads of people. But this particular day was quite perfect for me. It was cold and overcast, and it lent a sense of calm on what would normally have been a very crowded beach. Wrong one. This is taken on board a liner. I actually get commissioned to go on board a ship called Crystal Serenity and Crystal Symphony and get the chance to photograph the guests for a bespoke portrait session. And using the architecture on the ship as well and the colour, there's loads of areas around the ship with interesting lighting, different props that you can use. Over the back of the ship, and the idea is to take as many different portraits as you can to make a good sale, and it works out very lucrative for me, I have to say. And now we've got to the sort of area that I want to be in, with a nice soft light coming from behind. This is quite late in the day now, which is when I tend to do my portraits on the ship, and then a reflector in the foreground to give some light back up into the face. There's quite a romantic feel to it. And then once I've done that, at the same position, I brought a husband in and just got a very nice, engaging, warm, loving portrait. And then I think I finished off with one of the two of them, with her leaning against the rails, with him leaning on the opposite rail as a reflection in the mirror. That went across a full-page spread in their album. One of the other portraits that was interesting that I did was a couple that just got married, and they were on the cruise, and they were celebrating their honeymoon, and they commissioned me to take some portraits in Colombia. And when I was taking the portraits, I noticed this character behind me, and he was just watching what I was doing, but I thought he was really, I don't know what he was doing, what he was up to, but he was certainly interesting, and I just turned around and took a very quick picture of him. But that's a real true rendition of, look at the whites and look at the yellow in there, it's nice and clean. And this is the couple who just got married, so they wanted this bespoke portrait session, and we went all around this little tiny centre part of Colombia, finding different areas to take their portraits in. And the colour was very strong, so we added that in here. And quite often I'll leave them to get on and do the things, leave them quite natural, let them talk to each other, and quite often you get a portrait which really come out of something that you didn't expect. And again, on the cruise, this is a lady that spends most of her life cruising. She's a larger-than-life character, and if somebody says you can't do something, then she wants to make sure that she can, as you can see in this particular session. And this is her husband, again, larger-than-life character, and I always say portraits aren't expensive, they're priceless. And in this particular instance, the lady, his wife, telephoned me a couple of weeks ago to tell me how true that is, because her husband was taken seriously ill on the cruise, and he's now in hospital, taken off board the ship, and has been in hospital for 6 or 7 weeks now. And she said it just goes to show the value of the portrait. And this is one of the beach portraits I was talking to you about a few sessions ago. And just on an overcast day, the little boy just encouraged him to walk along on his own. And I photographed his parents' wedding 12 years ago. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to photograph the family as they've grown. And with children, I tend to try and let them do their own thing, and then to capture portraits at a later stage whenever I can. So this is now a more controlled one, where I just got him to lean against the wall and put his body position to how I wanted him to be. And the light is coming from the reflector, silver reflector, from the floor up into his eyes. This is his brother, and then the sister. So if you can notice in the background there, I've been photobombed. One of the brothers has crept round the back and he's just peeping through the grass. But the idea is to end up with something similar to what we have here. And that's how, so I've taken the portraits in such a way that they be positioned, that the children are looking in, with the focal point being the daughter in the centre of the image. And again, just I told the 2 little boys to walk forward, and then when I called the little girl's name, she just turned and looked back. That's full frame again. The branch is coming in from the left-hand side, add a nice bit of detail to what otherwise would be a quite empty sky. Same location, slightly older girl. Again, taken on the 70 to 200 with my assistant using a reflector to throw some light back up into the face to give a little catch light into the eyes. This is one of the new black and white conversions, and then I've added a tone to it afterwards, which we'll look at in a moment. So coming to the conversions now, this is a 70 to 200 full frame. Red being so dominant, it would be a shame to convert it to monochrome. So this is a straight conversion now into the black and whites. So there's the original file on the left-hand side. Then we've got the portrait high contrast, which I always used to use. And then we've got the skin effects, number 7, which I found to be particularly useful for this type of portrait. And then the new black and white portrait, number 7 as well. And as you can see, there's nothing done to those files apart from the the conversions. So that's how they convert it, but they're very, very, if you're doing this type of work, particularly if you wanted to be in the fashion, I think that black and white portrait number 7 works really well. Whereas I used to use the portrait high contrast, but those have had nothing done to them, so I just wanted to show you the differences in the conversion. And that's with the tonal. Now we've got a little bit of a project that I just worked on recently. So this particular project you're looking at now is people that have reached the age of 100 or in excess of. 90% of them are in wheelchairs, and some of them got dementia, but it was very worthwhile. This particular guy used to be a bodyguard for Winston Churchill. This lady's 105. Same lady. I asked her what she put down to her longevity, and she said she used to smoke full-strength cigarettes, then went on to red wine, and when she moved in the care home last year, she gave up sex. Everything again was available light and a reflector. One lens, 50mm. This lady never had a haircut. Ballerina. Milliner to the Queen. Unfortunately now, all these people have passed away. But, you know, looking at their hands, the lady had her nails done before I turned up. This is Sid. He has a bath every Wednesday, whether he needs it or not. Just look at those hands. Do some cream. Character. Only had the split ends cut in her hair in her life. When you see the arthritic hands, this is Winston's bodyguard again. This lady would only be photographed with her dog. This is how the portraits were presented. It was very difficult trying to track these people down. As you can imagine, not many people reach the age of 100. But the way that I actually did it for those that are interested was to just contact the families, the people that had parties, and I contacted the care homes. And once you'd got one, you usually found someone else that knew that somebody was 100. But it was, again, it was a beautiful project to do, and it's just a case of the fact of using very simple lighting. Nobody was dressing up and doing anything. They were just as they were, the clothes that they were in when I arrived. Those hands, I mean, the journey of her life, it just shows everything. And the way that people dress, I particularly like the way the cardigan folds down through in between her hands and the ring, and yet you can still see that the hands are riddled with arthritis. And this lady had promised her father that she would never have a haircut, so she only ever had the split ends done. She reminded me very much of a Native American Indian. And this lady was the milliner to the Queen. And my next project was an area in Dorset, West Dorset, called Bridport, where it's like stepping back 50 years. This gentleman here has had a family business for over 100 years, and they took it over in the late 1800s. And there's a gent shop and a lady shop next door, and as you can see, they only sell hats. And how often do you see shops that of this type of character? Not very often. And it's just a wonderful sense to go into an area from a bygone age. I did look at these in colour initially, but they just didn't work. Very interesting set of characters. This is an antique dealer. This guy used to work for Madame Two Swords, and when I got there, he was actually working on a full-length figure of Nelson Mandela. And this is in the old cinema that used to be in Bridport. And the governor, commanding figure, and the only lighting in here was a skylight coming down through, but it was quite dramatic, and I managed to just get a little tiny bit of a reflector coming up from the left-hand side to put a bit of relief into his right eye. And we got him to go outside and bring a coffin into the hearse, and he's actually pushing it forward towards me, so you can see there's a little bit of movement on there. And then there's the stonemason. Again, all available light. Now these are all people that I've mentored. These are all people that have got to their qualifications both within the BIPP or the MPA or any of the other associations. All right, if we've got any questions now.
Okay, can you hear me, Kevin? Can you hear me there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So we've got a few questions. One from Daniel. He says, what favourite camera and lenses do you use in wedding photography?
What's my favourite lens?
Yeah, what's your favourite?
70 to 200 or the 50mm.
Okay, so what's your favourite camera, Kevin?
The one I've got in my hand. Whichever I can use. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I think all the cameras are today are very good.
Yeah.
And basically, the ISOs and everything are on. It's made things so easy for us. But if I had my choice and the Hasselblad was faster than it is, I'd probably use the Hasselblad. I've used the Phase 1, and again, but when you're taking weddings, really and truly, you need to be capturing the action. And when the actual time lag is around about a second or just under, if you're taking a sequence of photographs, it doesn't always work as well. But the portrait quality is amazing. But what we're going to do now is just show you quickly this new colour system, the colour grading. So just how easy it is to just move across and change the colour balance very simply. And you can do it into the shadow areas or in the highlights or in the mid-tones very, very quickly to change it to your own taste, how you want it to be. So it's a very useful, quick addition. You could do it in curves if you wanted to do so, but this is so simple to use. Very useful for me. And this one doesn't work in black and white, so we decided that we would want to put it into the colour, but you can make the colour hue to whatever you want it to be. And here's quite a good example of this one here, which is quite often when I'm taking flare pictures, I take the lens shade off. Not that the camera manufacturer would recommend it, but if you take the lens hood off and let the light go across the lens, you get this beautiful ethereal feel to it. And so from a couple of quick corrections here, you've got a very nice portrait. So that's why I use Capture One.
Okay, do you have time?
That's very simple steps. And if you try to do that in Photoshop, it would take you quite some time to do that. And that's without doing any adjustments on the exposure. All that is just within the colour wheels. So it's very simple. So what other questions have you got there then, Dave?
Okay, we've got a few more. We've got one from Mary. She asks, can you let us know the location of the graffiti in your Irish wedding?
If she sends me an email, I'll find out. I can't remember, but if she sends it to me, I can find out from the bride and groom. They just got me to go over there. Okay. And I only shot that run about 6 months ago. It's a very interesting place to be.
Yeah.
If she sends me an email, I'll find out the name of the location.
Okay, great. So, question from Nick. At what point in your career did you become confident in your own decision making and image selections?
Well, that's one of the biggest drawbacks about digital, really, is when you're trying to go through a wedding, an image selection, and what to leave in and what to leave out. Is that what he's talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Well, generally speaking, one of the biggest weaknesses I see in photographers is they will take a dozen or 15 pictures of the same thing. And if it's not right first time, it's not going to be right the next time. So I would say just take 2 or 3 and then move on to the next position, or change the subject position, change the pose, do something different, or otherwise you're going to spend weeks editing pictures.
Okay. So another question from Sean. Do you still do mentoring or offer on-location courses?
Yes, I do mentoring. If you go to my website, there's a training page on there. You can have a 1 day, you can have a 3 day, you can have a 6 month, you can have a year. But I also do courses as well. Quite often I do an awful lot for the BIPP and for the SMPP as well. At the conventions, I did 2 courses this year. And I do a lot of judging and assessing of images for people.
Okay, great. So a question from Chris. Why is there no space over the heads of the people in portraits? Do you use the rule of thirds, or do you prefer to avoid any rules?
I prefer to avoid any rules if I can, but you've got to understand the rules before you can actually start to break them. But you know, I think you might be referring to the bride, where I explained it was more about the dress than about her. But I would have taken the same portrait as a full length, which she would have had her whole head in there. But I thought that was far more dramatic, and for the type of girl that she wanted something that was going to be quite dramatic and with a fashion-orientated pose to it. That's why I do that type of thing. But I don't always go in that close. But most of the stuff that I do is pretty much full frame. Very little cropping in it.
Okay, great. So a question from Andrew. Who has given you your most inspiration in your career?
Who's given me the most inspiration in my career?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that there's very few photographers want to give you their time. They're frightened you're going to steal their soul. But I don't believe in that. I believe that if I take my portraits, nobody can do what I can do because you have your own spin on things. But there were two photographers that I took inspiration from when I first started out. And one was called Peter Lowry, Lowry, as in Lowry the painter. And the other person was a chap called Neil Brightmore. Both excellent photographers. And I suppose I'm an amalgam of the two of them together. And I've had a very successful career. So, I mean, they helped me immensely when I first started out. But not many photographers have got the skills to pass on, I'm afraid. And I don't think that the work today necessarily is the standard of what it was 10 years ago. Yeah. And I blame digital for that in many ways. But if they get that, they've still got to remember the core elements, the composition, the lighting, the posing, the space around the image, and then finally the expression, which is always going to be very personal anyway.
Yeah, sure.
But I tend to prefer pictures where there's more of a feel to them as opposed to a great big broad smile. Yes, I do smiling pictures, but I much prefer to see a nice expression generated from the communication between myself and the subject of the portrait.
Okay, great. So final question then, Kevin. Ishan has asked if you'd like to give him an interview for his website.
Who?
Ishan has asked if you would give him an interview for his website. Shall we?
When does he want to do that?
Shall I send your email address through to him?
Yeah, I think I've had an email come through from him.
Oh, okay.
I think I had it through this afternoon when I was going through this.
Oh, okay, great. So, are we okay to show my screen then, Kevin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just put us onto my screen now.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'd like to say a big thank you to Kevin and thanks everyone for watching. We really hope you enjoyed the webinar. If there are any more questions, we'll try and collate these and answer them as and when we can. As you can see at the moment, we have some great special offers which we'll provide information for and links for in the follow-up email. So at the minute, we have a great deal with Adobe Creative Cloud Photography, where the Killer Monkey Photo and the i1 Photo Pro 2 come with the Adobe Creative Cloud Photography 1-year subscription package. Also, the i1 Display Pro calibrator has an option of an Adobe Creative Cloud Photography 1-year subscription at 15% off. So if you want to take advantage of these offers, these are available at xritephoto.eu. So we will also be uploading a recording of this webinar over the next few days. So anybody that registered, we'll supply that link to you all. So that means you can basically watch it in your own time. So don't forget you can learn more about Kevin and his work at www.kevinwilson.co.uk. And once again, I'd like to thank Kevin for his time and his excellent webinar. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And I really hope we can see you at the next one. Thank you very much.